It's interesting that that came up. Did I design this? I mean, I've got the stuff looking at, the question of transoceanic contact, and that moved into the Egyptians, and then Carthage. I'm just going through my watch later list, but it came up directly. Um, this is the answer. Let's see what I have to say about this one when it comes up. What I'll say before this starts is that the Carthaginians are. We have very few primary sources. If this is telling the story of the Roman Holocaust of Carthage, uh, and it's. I mean, it was a genocide. Um, I think the word Holocaust is reserved, but it's certainly a genocide. From what we understand of it, anyways, that is the right word to use. But it was total. Um, the reality is that we don't know because the Romans destroyed it. Like we're not. When we think of one civilization conquering another, we think of ideas about continuity, right? So we could, just as an example, when the Germans conquered Rome, I mean, what we consider Rome, or we we don't have to consider anything Rome. The city of Rome exists, um, but when we consider Rome, the city. I mean, it's not like Rome is not a Roman civilization cultural center anymore. Rome is a German city. Spain is a German country. Because everything about the society was torn down in the and built up again. But we don't think there was a genocide of Roman people. We remember the Roman religion um, quite quite vividly. We know the Roman language, quite important, but it ceased to exist. In fact, maybe I shouldn't be using Rome as an example of a colonized people. Maybe I should be. Well, let's compare, what Rome did in Carthage to what Rome did in Sweden. Um, we don't really have much of any remembrance of this Swedish religion either. But we do remember the Swedish language. We know the Swedish people. Um, we have a little bit of an idea of what Sweden was like. And we tend to consider what was lost to be a consequence of a lack of records rather than the destruction of them, although that is probably not um, well founded. Um, in fact, maybe there's more parallels there than, than is obvious. But nonetheless, we consider these ideas of continuity, right? Cultures merging, cultures adapting outside ideas, modifying themselves, but that's not what Rome did in Carthage. What Rome did in Carthage was they burnt the city to the ground, they paved over it, they killed everyone that lived there, and they rebuilt a Roman city on top of it. If you can imagine that. It's more comparable to what um, happened, with the British and and the Native Americans. That's a better way to think about it. Except that we have Native Americans still amongst us. There are no Carthaginians amongst us. Um, there have not been in thousands of years. Um, And what is astounding about this is that it's known that Carthage was very advanced, um, um, arguably and but very plausibly the most advanced civilization in that part of the world at the time, perhaps in the entire world altogether. Um, it may have been the most advanced city in the world in its period. There are, I mean, we talked about shipbuilding before. There's some thinking that the ships that the Carthaginians had, um, before the Common Era, talking like 300, 400 years before the Common Era, were comparable to the, well, to the Spanish ships that crossed the Atlantic. Um, so maybe part of getting our head around it is realizing that um, the technology they had was a lot more advanced than you think, or than you might imagine. Um, it was really more comparable to post Renaissance um, European technology, as amazing as that is, and it really ought to force you to think of the Romans um, in rather cataclysmic terms. Um, I think maybe the better way to see, we're kind of fed this line about civilization, um, and it's kind of tied in to uh, the kind of Christian narrative um, about creation and destruction, right? So we look at the Roman period as though it came from nothing and it was destroyed in an apocalypse. Um, and that may have been how Romans saw things themselves, um, or at least did, 1,000 years into the project. But maybe the better way to look at it is to realize that, um, and there's certainly more than enough source material to come to this conclusion, that the people that the Romans conquered saw the Romans in very similar ways to the ways that the Romans saw the people that conquered them. Meaning that one should um, put the rise of Rome not, in the context of the creation of something, but in the context of the destruction of what came before it. That the rise of Rome was every bit as destructive as the fall of it. And that it put in place a dark age that the Romans themselves were never able to transcend. Um, the people that destroyed the Romans were able to bring us back to where we were before the Romans. But the Romans were never able to compete with the people that they destroyed. And I know that that is not at all the concept of history that we're supposed to accept. But who wrote that history? The Romans. So, of course, it puts them in the center. It puts their religion in the center. And the entire narrative is centered around their story and their religion. But it's wrong. And one of the best ways you can see how wrong it is to get as much of the story of Carthage as you can. If you can find this documentary, in fact, I'll put a link to it. It's very, very much worth watching. And I'm saying this because I do think I've seen this before. Um, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure I have. Or at the very least, I've seen many documentaries like this before. Maybe I'll find a couple of them and put them in. But this, like I say, it has the potential to really, even if you think you know a little bit about how this history works or you enjoy reading up about history and stuff, the story of Carthage is, or again, as much as we know about the story of Carthage, is a real epiphany creator. Um, it it ought to baffle you, um, uh, and really kind of change the way you think um, uh, about um, these Romans that um, we consider the creators of our civilization. You know, and again, I mean, a lot of it's. See, I'm presenting this. Even this Christian concept of history is of a creation and destruction is maybe a little bit out of date. Um, maybe looking at more of this Hegelian concept of progress, right? Of things getting better and better. Um, I think they're both wrong. I think the more accurate way to look at it is these waves of destruction, right? So if you take the Jambudis theory seriously, you had this wave of destruction coming in with the Kurgan peoples, and then you had a wave of destruction coming in with the Sea peoples. Later on, you had the wave of destruction with the Germans, and um, in between there, this is something that nobody puts into proper context. But there needs to be that destruction horizon that's associated with the um, Roman burning of the known world. Um, Burning and, of course, rebuilding. But maybe there should be a stronger emphasis, a stronger focus on the burning and what it is that can be reconstructed of what existed before. Although, again, like I say, the word genocide is apt. It is correct. I'm not aware of an earlier one. It might be the world's first genocide. Um, the Carthaginians were not merely destroyed, they were erased. And thus, the fact that we don't know anything about them, that's intentional. We were not supposed to know anything about them. They were entirely, purposefully, intentionally removed from history. Um, Again, it's a different. Evidence is more important than theory, and theory should reflect evidence. Um, I'm sorry to be condescending, but it's necessary to point that out. Unfortunately, over and over again, and I no doubt will as I'm going through these videos. But yeah, watch this; it's interesting.